I remember thinking about loneliness when I was young, and I remember thinking that even if there was only one person, no matter how far away they were, but one person whom I knew would understand me or would truly see me, that would be enough for not feeling alone. Today I can see that as a need for connection, and we all know that a connection is it's a very important part of the human experience. We it does us good to feel connected to other humans, and connection, I don't think, has to do necessarily with with physical proximity with another human being. It has to do with the understanding of that other human being, because we have had the experience of being amongst other people, even in crowds, and still feeling alone. So what is that variable that makes us feel connected to somebody else, or that makes us, not feel alone with somebody else? And I remember having these other two analogies for this feeling, because it's something that I've in a sense always felt throughout my life. Not necessarily alone. I've been, quite blessed or lucky to have really great people around me. But this sensation of, I don't know, just having just very few people whom I could really connect with. And today I could maybe understand it as a neurodivergence, as, feeling strange, and all of that might be correct. But there might be something else happening as well, because I don't, or I know, or I think that this is not an experience, only of the neurodivergent people or individuals. And the other two analogies that I came up with was one, and this one might have to do more with language. The image was that I felt as if the inside of who I was, or the essence of who I was, had a shape, let's say a star or a circle, and that the opening through which this, this complexity of what I was could be expressed, or let's say kind of conveyed to the outside world, had a different shape. So let's say, a square. So if that star or that circle wanted to come out, it didn't have the right shape for it. So the only other possibility for it to be expressed was to shrink it. So to make the star very small, or to make the circle, much smaller, so it could, pass through the square. And I see this analogy sort of as, something that I've also talked in other videos, but essentially the idea that, the complexity of what we are as human beings is, it's flattened by language, meaning that language is not a complex enough vehicle for us to fully express the totality of what we are. And essentially that, that shouldn't be problematic. The part where I think it becomes problematic is that because we rely so heavily on verbal language, and we don't, let's say, hone these other ways of connecting and communicating, I feel that part of who we are is constantly not coming across. The other analogy that or idea that I would come up with when I was a child or an adolescent was the phrase or the idea of constantly being in the periphery. So I felt that no matter how good I was at, going inside the circle and trying to allow myself to kind of fully be permeated by the vision and the ideas, and there was always something that, either a perspective or a vantage point, or a way of being, that would make me feel that I was always kind of looking from the outside in. And as I just mentioned, now I can attribute some of that to being neurodivergent, to feeling that, that I wasn't completely, like other people, but that doesn't fully, I don't know, explain it to me, because there are many other neurodivergent people out there. So, I mean, essentially, if it were just because of the neurodivergent traits, I could have just found other neurodivergent people to connect with. But I go back to the same idea as I was mentioning a moment ago. I think it has more to do with kind of like the sense that the complexity of what we are is very difficult to transmit in conversation, for instance. So this leads me to another thought that I would constantly have when I was young, and I guess I still have it. But the idea of how nice it would be to have a friend over and not talk, not have to talk. And I mean, this, I guess, you could think that is similar to the concept of parallel play in the neurodivergent community, where essentially two or more individuals share a space while they each do their, individual activities. And that could be, one of the ways to communicate without language, but not only that. It doesn't. I don't mean just to share a space and and by sharing the space to communicate or connect with others, because essentially you could go to a museum and be connecting with other people who are sharing the same space, each doing their own activity. There's I think there's a variable that implies intention. So the intention of connection, even throughout, without words. So my fantasy would be that a friend would come over and we would essentially, I mean, do the same thing that we would normally do in terms of wanting to know more about the other person, but without using words. And I know that's quite abstract to think about. I mean, I don't necessarily have an example with a friend. You could think that we do this with our partners sometimes, because with our partners we can also have touch, or we can share different things that are I don't know, that are already part of the system that we have created. And with friends there's a bit of a larger leap. But I mean, that was my idea, that I thought that through other ways of communicating it would be easier for me to get to know somebody else and the other person to get to know me. And I also, I mean, I would go even a step further by saying that I feel that even the moment when we start using language, usually like all the other levels and complexity just collapses. And I mean, and even though I just said that, I don't think it's purely due to neurodivergent traits. I do think it has a lot to do with masking. And I will, for this analogy, use also language as kind of like a layer of masking. Because essentially, if we, I don't know, if we are, we have an enormous complexity, and we are a bunch of things that cannot be necessarily named just with language. There's always kind of like a sensation that that part of all of those things that you are, or that whatever, maybe it's not a thing, but that complexity that you are has to be I don't know, reshaped, or maybe some part of it has to be veiled for it to fit into the with the outside world, not because of wanting to fit in necessarily, but just because of wanting to participate. So there's a collective understanding of certain rules and certain ways in which we interact as as cultures, as societies. And for the individuals to be able to participate in that, we kind of have to reshape ourselves a little bit to be able to participate in it. And and I don't necessarily have a solution out of it, because we do live in a society, and we it's not like we can go out into the world and just follow our impulses all the time. That essentially would probably eventually lead to hurting somebody else, and that's not something nice either. But but the I don't know, the idea of us being able to share ourselves from kind of like a more authentic way. And I don't necessarily think that language is the ideal way for doing that. It would even lead me to kind of even feel that, I mean, quite discouraged in terms of wanting to, relate to other people or, see other people, because I would constantly feel like, well, what's the point? Why should I go and try to interact with this person if it's going to be performative to a certain extent? And maybe there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's part of the nature of human interaction. But I have always felt that there's something more. There's a better way to kind of like get to know each other. And you probably have had this experience when, there are certain people whom which you feel an instant connection with, or, that you immediately like, or that you can much easier develop a friendship with than others. We could get into, I don't know, into other topics like, like karma, or, the impulses of attraction and repellent? No. Attraction, or what's it the opposite of attraction. I can't think of the word right now. Or just neutral. So we could think about those forces as well, but even without thinking about that, there's certain people whom which you can, it's not like this, but it almost would feel as if there was a key and a lock, and and there's kind of like an instant opening of that, of that relationship. And there are other people whom with that doesn't happen. And I know that there are a ridiculous amount of variables that would allow for that to happen or not to happen, such as, our values, where we grew up, even our language, just a bunch of things. But even past that, if we kind of think of just ourselves as, like my essence connecting to your essence, I think that there are better ways to to kind of connect with others, and and not have kind of like the noise of the of the masks, or the noise of the language, or the barriers of the language to get in the way of that connection. Why would that be important, or why would we even want to do that? I mean, first of all, or maybe it's a reason enough. We have such a need for connection as human beings, and we have such a lack of it. Nowadays, maybe it has been the case for a longer time, but this is the period of of humanity in which I'm living right now, and and it's a real pity that happens, or that is happening, because it's happening to most of us. And and if it's a symptom that many of us are having, there's an issue with the way in which we are relating. And to summarize or end this little video today, I'll just leave you with that. I feel that the ways in which we are trying to connect with others are becoming increasingly flatter, more superficial. They're lacking depth, and I think that is something that we should kind of reverse and go into the other direction, and to start sharing kind of ourselves more authentically, share the depths of who we are in a more authentic way. Anyhow, that's what I've been thinking about in the past 2 days. And a little update about my life in terms of the transitions and burnout and all of that. I already applied for the visa for moving to the UK permanently. I'll still keep my apartment in Mexico and probably, continue coming for work, but I'm waiting for that to come through. So I'm still in a bit of a limbo, which I kind of feel that is the state of my entire life. I always feel that I'm kind of like in limbos, in transition, in between one thing and the other. And I could talk more about that, but maybe I'll do another video on that subject, because I don't know, I feel that a very important thing for us as humans has to do with like de-anchoring our perception of reality. And I know it sounds like a separate subject to the one that I started talking about, but it has to do with, with fostering deeper connections as well. So anyhow, I hope you have a great day, and see you next one.